Welcome to the Multifamily Investor Nation podcast. I'm your host, Whitney Elkins Hutton, the Director of Investor Education here at PassiveInvesting.com. And I'm so excited to be joined again today by my good dear friend, Elaine Stageberg. Elaine, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat through this deal that we put together.
Absolutely. Well, all right, before we dive into the details of residences at Discovery Square, 129 units in Rochester, Minnesota, talk to us a little bit about yourself, how you got into multifamily real estate and where you're at today.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Elaine Stageberg, as you mentioned. I'm a psychiatrist by training, though I haven't practiced medicine for a few years. I'm married to Nick Stageberg. He's also been on your show, so people can find his show. We run Black Swan Real Estate. So we're a vertically integrated real estate investment firm, property management company. We have about 300 million in assets under management. We've been doing this since 2011, so about 13 years. We're in Rochester, Minnesota, which is where Residence of Discovery Square is, and Tacoma, Washington. And basically just started as mom and pop investors. Our very first property was the home that I lived in before we got married. So we were accidental landlords. Then we bought a property, did a BRRRR business plan, really liked that. I remember that moment we had that first check in our hands that was more than we had started with when we acquired that property, and just said, wow, we want to do this as many times as we possibly can. And so that's been our business model all the way through. We've never sold a single asset. We always have a deep value add plan so that we can increase the value, do a cash out refi, keep all of those assets and buy more and more and more. And then as we scaled, we started working with passive investors through our private equity funds. And that's how we got to where we are today.
Amazing story, Elaine. So let's dive into the details. Residences at Discovery Square, 129 units, Rochester, Minnesota. When did you close on this property and for how much?
April of 2023 for 20.
Well, you kind of cut out there. Can you repeat the purchase price?
27 million.
27 million. Okay. I was like, perfect time for Doug.
a little ping on my computer. Sorry about that.
Yeah, we'll let everybody guess what the purchase price was. No, just kidding. Okay, 27 million. So how did you first get this property under contract? Like, let's back up that timeline there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're in Rochester, Minnesota, which is a relatively small market. And we have lots of relationships with, pretty much everyone in town. So this was listed by a local brokerage that we have a great relationship with. I think we've closed, probably somewhere between 5 and 8 buildings with them, somewhere around there. So we were top of mind for them. They know that we're buyers. They know that this was within our buy box. And when it was listed, we reached out on that very first day and had a tour, I think within like a day or two, and basically just said, we want to put in an offer and put in a strong offer as quickly as possible. And we've done a lot of deals together. You know that we close. We know that you're easy to work with. Let's make this happen. And there was some distress in the deal, which, we'll talk about here, that made it somewhat challenging for a buyer to get financing. And they knew that we could close that problem, so to speak. And so we were under contract probably within 7 or 10 days of it being listed, all from local relationships.
Well, what was your overarching business plan with this asset? Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So as I mentioned a little earlier, our business plan is always a deep value add plan to be able to do a cash out refi. And this building was built in 2019. So you might be scratching your head and saying, well, how can you do a deep value add plan on a building that's only 4 years old? So this building had been built in 2018, 2019, and the entire ground floor was meant to be commercial space, as happened in many cities in the late 2010s. Cities want to move more toward walkability and having mixed use, having that like live, work, play experience for people. And that building was part of that sort of overall movement in city planning. And then what happened in 2020, right? The whole world shifted, especially retail, shopping, office. And so when we acquired the building when we got under contract on the building in late 2022, we're at the beginning of a new year. So I'm always trying to calculate in my mind, what year is it? It's 2024 now. We got under contract in late 2022, closed in April of 2023. That commercial space was still vacant. So despite the fact that the building was 3 years old and all of the residential units were full, it was 3 years into that building having essentially a quarter of the building completely vacant. And the original builder was a couple in their late 70s. They're independently wealthy from completely unrelated businesses outside of real estate, and had, put some money into this deal basically as a way to have, I don't know, kind of one last hurrah before they went off into retirement. And they were thinking they would build the building in, say, 2018, 2019, fill it in 2020, sell it, and then be done. So when they were still holding it at the end of 2022, they were pretty unhappy with that. Whereas we're the complete opposite, right? We're 40 years younger than they are. We're excited to develop. We've done new construction before. We've done renovations, extensively. And this was a way for us to acquire a building that was brand new construction that still had a huge value add play, because essentially a quarter of the building was not full.
So are you looking to put more commercial units in there? Are you looking to transition them to residential units? Like, what's the plan there?
Yeah, to residential, right? Because that's what we know. That's what we know the city needs. It's our belief that if it's been 4 years with vacant commercial space, that that ship has sailed and society shifted through 2020, and it just no longer makes sense. So there's been quite a bit of negotiations with the city, but we have been approved for 25 units on that ground level. There is one corner of the building that they're holding approval. They really want us to work our hearts out to get some type of like small pizzeria or coffee shop or kind of something in that space. We have somewhat of a handshake agreement that if we can't fill that in the next several months, so basically when we've hit about a year of ownership, that then they'll seriously consider our application to convert those into residential units as well. But we're converting most of that ground floor commercial space into kind of like urban townhome units. So if you think about it, they all have individual doors because they were meant to be nail salons and hair salons and little restaurants and those sorts of things. So they'll all have their own exterior access, but still be able to access the underground parking from the inside. And then someone could either enter the unit from the sidewalk or from inside of the building if they park their car in the parking garage. And they're tall. They're like almost 2-story units with huge, beautiful glass where we'll have remote controlled shades so that people can bring those down, as the night comes and they want privacy, but then have them open during the day and have an amount of natural light that's just, unheard of in a typical apartment unit. We're building them out kind of like an industrial style. So polished concrete floors. Some of the ceilings will be exposed. Just really excited about how it's coming together, and just basically taking what we know, which is residential real estate, taking this building where the 129 units were stabilized, but there was a huge value add opportunity, not only for the value of the building, but for the community to fill this vacant space with what is needed in our community, which is housing.
Well, let's talk about due diligence, right? Because you've already alluded to not everything has gone exactly smooth in this process. Actually, before we get to due diligence, let's talk about the offer. So how did you structure the offer on this building? And you said you're under contract in 7 to 10 days, but like, how did you structure it?
Yeah, so that's probably the thing that's most interesting about this building is it was a $27 million purchase price, but because the in-place financials were relatively poor, right? Continuing to go back to that idea that basically a quarter of the building was completely vacant, right? That was never the plan for this building. And the seller, they were in their late 70s and were basically saying to the bank, who they had a many decades long relationship with, like, hey, we want to be done with this. The financials were not in great shape. The in-place NOI was 1.2 million, so relatively low for a $27 million acquisition. And so we, because we had that great relationship with the broker, we had never worked with this particular seller before, but we had that great relationship with the broker where we had acquired many distressed buildings from them. So they knew that we had the ability to close even when in-place financials are very poor. We structured a deal that we put $3 million down. We put $2.5 million into a construction escrow. So basically we prepaid the construction into an escrow at the bank, and we assumed the note. So in April of 2023, remember that was a time when interest rates were starting to go up drastically and there was a lot of uncertainty in the market. The in-place note was like 2.38%. There were 5 participating banks. So we had to go through the approval process with all 5 participating banks and really help them to understand the story that the seller was going to stay on the note. This is a full recourse note. The seller was going to stay on the note. Nick and I were going to come in as personal signers on the note, and our private equity fund, and we were putting money into construction so that we could build out that vacant space that was, essentially just blight inside of the building, and show them not only the physical value that was coming into the building through finishing out that ground floor level, but also the work value that was coming in from younger folks, a new property management company. We have a proven track record of increasing the value of buildings, managing them very, very well. So getting the broker knew all of that because of our relationship with them. So getting the seller to see that and to see that it would be very hard for the seller to sell the building to most other buyers because of the in-place financials. And then getting all 5 participating banks to understand that the only way this would work would be with a loan assumption because of interest rates going up. So they did eventually require a 0.5 point increase on the interest rate, which we were happy to take because at that point prevailing interest rates were probably in the 5s, maybe even the low 6s by then. So we were happy to be in the low 3s. But that was really the most interesting part of this deal, was doing a loan assumption with 5 participating banks with very poor in-place financials and getting all of that to happen based off of the reputation of the other projects we've done over the last several years, showing those participating banks, well, this other building, here were the in-place financials when we closed, and then here were our financials a year later. Here are all the renovations we've done. Here are the new construction projects that we've done. So the lesson I would say there to the listener is, when you're working with brokers and sellers and bankers, it's not necessarily just about that particular deal. It's about what you've done in the past and the track record that you have, that you can apply that model to that particular deal. And that's how we were able to get such a favorable offer with extraordinarily favorable financing.
So let's talk a little bit deeper about the terms of the financing. And you assumed the note, and you're in the low 3s. So how long was that rate locked in? Is it locked in for a period of time? Is there prepayment penalties if you decided you wanted to, because you've already mentioned your business plan is to refinance out the capital and hold the building long term.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit more about the details of that note.
Yeah. So that note expires in October of 2024. So we have about 8 months left on that note. So we had about 18 months on that note when we closed. That gives us enough time to get all of the approval with the city to have our construction done. Our construction should be done in about April of this year, like hopefully that first week of April. We have a plan to do about half of those units as short-term rentals and then to lease about half of those units as long-term rentals. And we're already working with the main bank, not the participating banks, but the main bank, to say, hey, when this note renews, of course, there will be an interest rate increase. We're hoping that, as Jerome Powell is signaling, that interest rates, continue to come down through 2024. But they've indicated that they want to keep the debt. That they're excited about the work that we've done, the hustle that we've put into the building, how our property management company has managed it. So none of that's set in stone, none of that's inked, but we've been working with that bank about every 6 weeks or so to really help them to understand the story. Because what we would like to avoid in October is a cash-in refi. We're prepared to do a cash-in refi, and in our minds, it's all for the greater good, because we acquired this building, $27 million purchase price. We only put $3 million down. So if we need to bring, say, another $3 million, we're still only at about 20% down overall. But ideally, we would have just a neutral refi where it's not cash in or cash out, because we've increased the value of the building and have built such a great relationship with the bank. So that's what we're striving for in October, is to have a neutral refi, get another 5 years of fixed rate debt at whatever the prevailing interest rates are there, supported by the NOI of the original 129 units, where we've improved the rents. Expenses were already pretty well controlled, but we did optimize that as much as we could, but then mostly from increasing the NOI through building out the ground floor.
Gotcha. Well, let's get into due diligence. right? It sounds like the fun stuff is in the financing piece, but what about due diligence on a property like this? Yeah, how did it go?
So fairly easy. The way we do due diligence is, I would say somewhat simple. So Nick and I, as owners, will walk every single unit. It takes about a day to get through a 129 unit building. We'll have our property management staff there walking every single unit. We'll usually have one member of our maintenance walking every single unit. And then we bring in like a professional inspector who does the whole building. We'll bring in a plumber, an electrician, basically like the skilled trades, the same people that do all of our renovations, we bring in to do our inspections. And it's all pretty streamlined. I mean, it was a 2019 construction date, so we weren't expecting any major problems. And that proved to be true. I mean, we've acquired buildings that are 100 years old, so we're we're pretty used to like when things are a major disaster. This was like, oh, this is pretty easy for us. The seller had already had approval for a portion of those residential units in the ground floor, what was commercial. So that was a big part of us feeling like this was a safe deal to take on. Without that approval from the city to do a portion of that ground floor as residential, this would have been a much riskier play because, as we just discussed with the financing, there's not a ton of time between when we closed and when the financing renews. So we needed to have a pretty clear plan to increase the NOI. So that was a big piece of it, and just checking with the city, making sure that those approvals were all legitimate, that everyone was happy with them, that they were still up to date, that the city hadn't changed their mind, and then working with our builder to talk with them while we were under contract to make sure that the timelines and everything would make sense, make sure that we could hit our budget for all of the construction. And then, of course, all of the typical, since we're vertically integrated, we are the property management company. So all of the typical work that goes into verifying the rent roll, verifying all the expenses and contracts, all of those sorts of things. Due diligence, I would say, was on the easier side because it was such a new building. I mean, we're so used to acquiring very, very old buildings and doing very exhaustive renovations that this felt so much easier for us, that we weren't doing any renovation per se. We were doing adaptive reuse in essentially a white box space that already had plumbing, already had HVAC, already had all of the main components of the building, and we were just coming in and finishing out the units.
Well, I mean, what seems fortunate here was relatively new build, and like you said, white boxes on the ground floor. So if there were any issues, I mean, you could see them and you could get to them
Yeah,
like
exactly.
immediately. Were there
Yeah.
any surprises that you uncovered? I mean, even though they probably seem minor to you compared to your normal business plan that you take on, but were there any surprises in here that might be of interest to the listener?
Not on necessarily the due diligence side, but the 5 participating banks were a surprise. So the bank who has the debt is a large bank, and they have a lending limit that's quite large. So when we heard 27 million, and we knew that the seller had, put some money down, and that this wasn't the basis, for the seller and all of the things, we thought, well, surely that bank has the entire debt. And so through our negotiations of, this is what we'll put down, this is our plan, we want to assume the debt, as we were working with the seller and the broker to get all of that squared away, in our minds, we had an assumption that the bank was the bank, and we'd done this many times before with loan assumptions. If there's only one bank involved, you only have to present to one board, and I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's certainly easier, right? Anytime you have any decision in your life, if there's one decision maker versus 5 decision makers, it's going to be easy. So it wasn't until we were under contract that we found out that there were 5 total participating banks. And that was definitely a moment of like, oh boy, we're confident in this story. We're confident in our track record. We've got the seller on our side who very much wants to sell this building to some younger folks that are excited to do the construction and take on this big project. We've got the broker on our side who knows our track record, who has closed many buildings with us. We have a pretty good relationship with the main bank, but the other banks we had no relationship with. They had never heard of us. And so that was a moment where Nick and I, just basically like got to put our britches on and do the work and make the calls and send the financials and send the renderings and help these parties who are a step or two removed from us understand this plan and understand how this is absolutely a win-win-win deal. The seller's staying on the note. A very reputable property management company is going to manage it. We have experience with construction. We're bringing our own personal balance sheet. We're bringing the private equity fund, getting them to see that they stood to lose nothing. They only stood to gain all of these other protective factors in the loan. But that was a surprise. I won't lie that when we got that call of, oh, there's 5, we're like, how many participating banks? Say that kind of like in the beginning here when there was a little ping when I was saying that number. It's like, say that number again? Oh, 5. Okay, we'll figure
That's
that
the number
out.
I thought you said. So I'm curious, did that not need to be disclosed in the LOI? Because I'm sure you had money down for this deal, right? You guys put earnest money down. Was it hard? Like,
I honestly don't remember kind of where that was revealed in. It was early in the process. I don't think we would have had non-refundable earnest money at this time. We had been doing non-refundable earnest money through much of 2022, 2021, because the market was just so hot. I don't remember if in this particular deal we had non-refundable earnest money or not. It was revealed, somewhat early, but it wasn't, and I don't think it was hidden. I think it was just everyone thought, oh, well, we're just working with the bank. We're just working with the bank. And then when we went and had conversations with the bank to say, hey, let's, can we get this approved by the board? That was when the bank said, oh, did you know there's 5 participating banks? I'm like, no, in fact, we didn't. Let's get approval from all of those boards as well.
oh my gosh. All right. And so what was your timeline to close here?
It took longer than we wanted because of those participating banks. So we got under contract in late 2022. I want to say maybe October, November, and we were really hoping to close by the end of 2022. Number one, to get the construction started because we knew that we had kind of that drop dead date of October of 2024 when the existing financing ends, and then also because of bonus depreciation, right? So we're theoretically in this time frame where there's the stair step down with bonus depreciation, might be changed by the government, as we speak, but that was a big part of it. And so when the variable of the additional participating banks came into the deal, that's when the closing was delayed and delayed and delayed, and then we eventually closed in April of 2023. So we were probably under contract for maybe about 6 months when we were hoping to be under contract for more like 2 months.
And so with each one of these delays, did you have to put down additional earnest money to keep the contract secure?
No. I mean, we were the belle of the ball. The broker and the seller knew how hard we were working, right? Like it's somewhat unconventional that the buyer would be having all of these conversations with the participating banks of debt that's held by the seller, right? And so they were like, wow, I'm so sorry this is happening. Thank you so much for taking all these calls. Thank you so much for not giving up on us. They very much knew that this was a win-win deal, that the seller was able to get the purchase price that they wanted. They were able to sell it to a buyer who could get financing, period, right? Because interest rates were going up. The quarter of the building was not just vacant, but empty. It was just white box space. I said the in-place NOI was only 1.2 million. Well, that doesn't really support a purchase price of 27 million, particularly as interest rates were going up. So that it was like quite the opposite. They were like, I'm so sorry this is happening. Thank you so much for working so hard. We're going to make sure this that this gets closed, that can we call the participating banks for you? It was very much a team sport, right? Obviously there was a broker involved and Nick is a broker, so he represented our side. But by the time it was all done, like we were all very much working on a team to get the ownership of this building transferred, and everyone was very happy. We had this beautiful fine dining rooftop experience with the broker and the seller and Nick and I, a few weeks after close. We've never done that in a transaction before. We have tons of great relationships and have had lots of very pleasant closings, but we've never had like a celebratory dinner with the seller when we've closed a building.
Well, let's not forget, you were also raising capital for this transaction this whole entire time. So tell us about how you structured this deal for your limited partners.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a $27 million deal. We only put 3 million down and then 2.5 million into the construction escrow. So the relative amount of capital that we needed was somewhat small, but we also knew we were going into a construction project. So we acquired this building half owned by Black Swan Real Estate Fund One and half owned by Black Swan Real Estate Fund Two, and that allowed us to have a bigger balance sheet, more liquidity, more reserves, to buffer any potential problems that we might have come across during that construction project. Blessedly, we haven't. Despite all of the inflation that we've seen through 2023, we've stayed on budget, we've stayed on time, so it's gone really well. But we wanted to potentially, foresee any problems that we saw, and it was too big to acquire in either Fund One or Fund Two alone. And so we split the ownership 50-50. And then our model in our funds is very different. It's basically 100% of all of the profits go back to our partners until they're completely repaid. And then after we get to that time period when our investors are completely repaid, we hold our deals indefinitely in that infinite rate of return period. And so this fit right into both Fund One and Fund Two. All of our funds are structured, exactly the same. And so it made sense to split this deal.
So how how do you guys keep the lights on then? Like, are you guys charging fees to the fund? Is there acquisition fee, asset management fee, stuff like that?
Yeah, excellent question. So we don't charge any GP level fees whatsoever. So we don't have acquisition, asset management, loan recourse. We personally sign on all of our notes. We don't have a loan recourse fee, capital event fee, all of those things. Basically, we raise capital. We have no fees. We use all of that capital to acquire and improve residential real estate. We give 100% of the profits back to our partners until they're completely repaid. And then once we get to that time, when our partners are completely whole, then we have a 50-50 split indefinitely during that infinite rate of return period. We tell people to plan for about a 20 to 25-year hold period. We want to hold them as long as possible, but we also don't set a specific year. Like, what if in, say, 2044, that's a rough year for the real estate market. We don't want to be forced to sell. So about 20 or 25 years from now, we'll start to look to divest these assets and then share out the final equity. And then we keep the lights on, so to speak, through our own legacy portfolio. So before we ever started raising capital, Nick and I built our own portfolio. We have about 200 units that we personally own, and that allows us to delay our gratification. So we will be paid from all of these deals when we're in that split period. But in the initial period, we just very much believe in prioritizing our investors, de-risking the deal as much as possible. And so that's why we chose to set our funds up this way with no fees and 100% of profits going back to our partners until they're completely repaid, even though it is rather unconventional.
Well, let's wrap up here, Elaine. Tell us something about this project that you thought was going to be easy, but ended up being harder. And I'm wondering if there's something else additional beyond just the four participating banks.
Yeah,
And then was there something that was more difficult, actually ended up being that you thought was going to be more difficult that actually ended up being easier?
Yeah, certainly the participating banks is the story of this deal. That is the black swan, right? So that's the name of our company, Black Swan Real Estate. A black swan is a piece of information that you don't expect. And I think anytime you're in any sort of negotiation or making big decisions, just keep asking questions until you get to the black swan. Like another simple example of that is there's a deal that we're working on right now, was owned by a man and a woman, unrelated, not romantic partners or anything like that, completely unrelated. And they're selling. And after many conversations with them, we found out that the male partner had passed away and he had been doing more of the operations. So that's the black swan there, that we can serve this person through knowing that and understanding her psychology and what she needs. So the participating banks was definitely the black swan piece of information in this project. Working with the city has been, I wouldn't say like exceptionally challenging, but I think anyone that has worked with cities understands the challenges there, right? They just have a different psychology. They don't necessarily understand the time value of money, or that, oh, if we just decide to make the decision 3 months from now, like there's major ramifications to that, right? They're not entrepreneurs. So really humbling ourselves and really seeking to understand their perspective and get them to see our side of the story and get them to see how there's win-win opportunity here for the city, and having some compromises, like we've held that one corner of the building, for potential commercial space. So that's been it's par, right? Anyone that has done development knows that can be a challenge. And then I would say something that's been easier is we have never done an adaptive reuse where it's just white box space. So it's way easier than new construction where you're digging in the ground, and it's way easier, like indescribably easier than renovation, where you're starting with something that you need to figure out, what do we keep, what do we not keep, how do we, you don't necessarily want to rewire and replumb and redo all the things in any given building. But when buildings are quite distressed, how do you decide when to do those types of value add projects versus when to do something a little simpler? Well, it's pretty easy if it's all white box and it's only a few years old. So the actual construction of the units has been very, very quick. It's fun to go check on it every couple of days and just see how much progress the team can make in just a few days.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, Elaine, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us here today.
My
If
pleasure.
Yeah, and if people want to learn more about you, how can they do so?
Our website is meetblackswan.com, meetblackswan.com. It has our track record, our portfolio, ways to sign up for our newsletter, learn about our investment offerings. We have a monthly teaching that we do called Community Power Hour, where we'll teach about interest rates or commercial lending or anything that's interesting to real estate investors. So all of that's there at meetblackswan.com.
Awesome. Well, Elaine, again, thank you so much for sharing your time with us here today, and we look forward to hearing about your future deals.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.